Hello and welcome to this free live as a part of the Compeat Academy. This is a dietitian specific session which is all about GLP-1s and their place in dietetic practice. And I must say, this is the most uncomfortable I've been in a session for a really long time, but also the most intrigued and curious and bought in that I've been. I think because it's taken me out of my comfort zone a little bit. I've been in a fortunate position where I probably haven't had to pay attention too much and just be on the fringe of understanding and those types of things. But over the last few months, it's become really clear that if I'm working with people, including athletes, I need to be upskilled and better informed when it comes to GLP-1s because, yes, it might make me uncomfortable. Yes, there might be friction in the way that it moves and disagrees with some of my values, and the culture around it can definitely be something that we talk about today. However, they're not going anywhere. And our role as practitioners needs to enable our ability to work alongside someone, not at someone, and ensure that we're not placing morality on these types of concepts when someone comes to us either wanting to integrate a GLP-1 or already having that as a part of their nutrition planning and response. So, this session is going to be less about a literature review and way more around our approach, our considerations, and how that fits in dietetic practice. I hope it's something that you can leave feeling a little bit more clarity with, and hopefully something that changes your perception and eases some of that contradiction that is so difficult when it comes to this space and how fast it's moving. So, first up, of course, we're going to talk a little bit about what GLP-1s are. Now, they're an endogenous gut hormone that means that it has already been a part of our living self for forever. And it's an endogenous hormone that is something that is released after we eat a meal. So it only lasts for minutes in the endogenous form. However, GLP-1s have now been formulated in the pharmaceutical space, which actually resist breakdown and they last for a week. And that's why that injection happens weekly, but also in amounts that is well beyond what our body would actually create. So, yes, it mimics and it is an agonist for GLP-1 hormone in the endogenous sense, but it is something that absolutely needs to be treated not as something natural, but as something that is absolutely like a medical piece. So I think like the mechanisms to that are really important to understand because they have a different role in how an individual responds, but also how it crosses over into so many pieces of our scope of practice with an individual. So there is the central response where we're looking actually at the brain response in appetite, satiety, but also in the reward pathways. Like the brain side of things is looking like it's the main reason why we see such weight change in GLP-1s. There is also the peripheral response. So looking at things like insulin secretion alongside glucagon suppression and also the delayed gastric emptying. I'm looking at my notes because I don't want to stuff this up, but also so important that we kind of go through both things. And just a note on the glucagon suppression is that it does suppress the release of glucose. So something that we will flag again when we go through where they sits with active individuals and athletes. Now, there's different types, and I think this is the really interesting piece which we'll see change quite quickly over time, as if it hasn't been changing quickly enough as it is. Now, there is the single agonist, so that's just GLP-1, and they're the brands like Ozempic, Wegovy, Saxenda, and we see weight loss around that 15% of body weight with these. The dual agonists contain GLP-1 but also GIP, which is another gut hormone, and this is your Mounjaro. So we see weight loss around the 20%, 21, 22% with this, so it's the highest that's on the market at the moment. But in phase 3 of trials is a triple agonist, which includes GLP-1, the GIP, but also glucagon. So we are seeing GLP-1 added, which actually suppresses glucagon, but also then glucagon added back in to ensure that it's actually increasing our energy burn. So this, if it gets through, which it looks like it will in near future, has the GLP-1 to suppress appetite. It has GIP to increase the insulin response, but then it also has glucagon to increase that energy burn. So really interesting space on how fast this is changing, but also the additions to the market. When we're thinking about the why and when this may be utilized, I think this is a very blurry space as well that we're all still understanding. And we are seeing a lot of, off-label prescription of this, which means that it hasn't been approved, but it can still be utilized with clear clinical reasoning. So type 2 diabetes is where it has been approved for use and one of the main reasons why it was originally created. We also, obviously, which is where most of this space sits, is in weight management. And alongside that, obstructive sleep disorder is a place where it's now emerging as well. The emerging approval is also around cardiovascular disease risk, and we will cover a bit of type 1 diabetes. That isn't off-label at the moment, so that'll be really interesting to see where that lands. And then there's active research, which this will cross over so much in our discussion today, around addiction, cognitive disorders, and also PCOS. And I think we'll need to also discuss its place in eating disorder and where that's currently sitting at the moment. So there is a cost to this. There is some subsidy when it's used for type 2 diabetes, but we don't see a subsidy for most people utilizing this. So the cost can range anywhere from $280 to $750 per month, as far as I'm aware. Like, honestly, I could be totally wrong here, but that is what I could find when I was researching. And I guess the big thing when we go to beyond this of like not just covering the what and the why, but also this crossover I need to mention in sport. And we won't spend a lot of time on this because I'm so conscious of how long I could talk about this. It's probably going to be another episode, I would say. However, it is appearing in the athlete population. And I think it would be a real miss if I didn't mention that, because I think there's a big assumption that this is only for those who are looking to lose weight or are sitting with type 2 diabetes. However, we are seeing its use in body comp adjustments and cuts acutely, but also in recreational athletes looking for weight loss or weight change. And there are concerns with this in the performance lens, the well-being lens, which we're digging deep in later, where we do see lean mass loss. We have a massive risk of underfueling and then the subsequent REDS piece to that as well. There's the hypoglycemia risk as a result of how GLP-1s work and its impact on glucagon, because that's actually how we message the liver to release glucose. So endurance athletes, take note, and anyone that you're working with in the endurance space, if they're taking GLP-1s, this is a really big thing to consider. But also we've got the changing gastric emptying, the risk around hydration, our impact to recovery, and on the watch list of WADA is GLP-1. So at the moment it is not banned, but it's something to just be aware of that it is on the current watch list on monitoring program. I don't know the right wording. I want to dig a little bit deeper now into something that I think, no, I'll go through that in a sec. First of all, I want to cover its crossover in the disordered eating disorder space. And I think this is a really big part in the practice side that I'll cover at the end, where there is so much overlap. And I think researching this over the last few weeks, thinking a little bit more about why I find it so high friction or uncomfortable at times, is I think I already recognize that it could be really useful for reducing food noise, but I don't think I fully appreciated where that can reshift and be replaced with. And I think as dietitians, that's where we need to be really cautious about our traditional approach with screening, questioning, and how we perceive success or recovery in the eating disordered space, and actually reframe that depending on this very new landscape. So the overlap I'm talking about is we do see reduced appetite. restriction, decreased eating, that kind of thing. We also see rapid weight loss. We see food preoccupation in a different form. I'm going to dig deeper into that. But also a suppressed intake from GI discomfort. So all of these can mask, they can mimic, but also they could trigger disordered eating or eating disorder. So it goes from, what can I eat? How do I earn that? All those types of thoughts that could be very busy in someone's head who is living with disordered eating or eating disorder, to thoughts around even, can I eat? Can I tolerate that? What's the risk of that? So what I'm talking about in that, I guess, increase in food preoccupation and how it looks and feels different is there's still food noise in a very different way, where they may actually be really fearful of symptoms and restrictive and losing flexibility in their food decisions because of those symptoms, because of that loss of appetite. And also there can be things like rigidity due to those symptoms. I think I mentioned that. I apologize. Where they are really restricted, in what foods they can have and how much. We might see fullness anxiety, which again, very different to that hunger anxiety that we might see differently. Because of the delayed gastric damping, people can be full for a really long time and it can be very uncomfortable. Food no longer brings pleasure. And so we need to really be curious about where that reward is coming from. Is it now being shifted to things like scale, weight, and those types of things? And also that perfectionistic tendency. So I want to give you an example of that, which I think we can all appreciate if we work with people, particularly athletes, is they want to be the perfect client, the perfect patient. And so if we have these, which we'll go through in a sec, number-based goals of what we need to hit in terms of protein targets, for example, micronutrients, fear around malnutrition, all those types of things, they can then want to do that perfectly. So reach the numbers perfectly, reach the protein targets perfectly. So all of a sudden we're moving towards more tracking, more trending, and wanting to hit those numbers and feel like that's the version of success. And the food thoughts that previously took up time may actually move to more body thoughts, body comparison, body weighing, body checking, all those types of things. So if we only screen in the traditional sense, we really do risk missing some really big things, because we may actually, and I think honestly, I've thought this often, I hear stories around GLP-1s and I'm like, wow, that is actually really cool that it reduces food noise. And what a win. You hear comments like, I never think about food anymore, or I'm not anxious around food anymore. It doesn't take up space. Like, wow, that's like success. That's like, really what we're aiming for in our disordered eating recovery and all those types of things. That's really how we screen for improvements, is like how much space is food taking up, food and body thoughts taking up in your mind. But how do we change that to actually talking a little bit wider around how much mental energy do you spend thinking about the medication, when you need to eat next, your appetite, your fullness, and also, what's taken the place of that food noise, food thoughts since starting the medication? How do we avoid, have you noticed yourself avoiding food situations? Are you still able to eat socially, flexibly? If we think about the raves framework and have, those things like spontaneity might be lost, eating socially might be lost. We might lose variety, adequacy, all those things actually move through to a point where are we in a place of disorder which actually looks and sounds different? And I hadn't thought about that way previous to really digging into this. And I think that's just something that I wanted to voice, where we may actually need to screen and talk about things differently, both in the short term, but also in the long-term progression, where obviously graduation from GLP-1s is often the goal and should be spoken about quite early in management with a client. Now, the contraindications, wow, I said that poorly. The contraindications in eating disorder as a diagnosis. So, if someone is diagnosed with a restrictive eating disorder, it is contraindicated There is promising research in its use with binge eating disorder, but also bulimia nervosa. So that's interesting. It's emerging. It's definitely with caution. But there's some evidence in terms of the drivers. But the drivers of the actual disorder are still not being addressed. So I think that's really important that we put that there. The other bit, which I cannot state enough, is how underdiagnosed and misrepresented those living in larger bodies are in the eating disorder screening space. And are they even screened prior to being placed on a GLP-1? So that systemically is a really big flag for me that I think as a profession we need to be really aware of and place within our remit of ensuring let's not do any harm and actually see where someone sits in their relationship with food alongside working with them in this space. So before we continue, I think the reason why I've been hesitant to really delve in is it has sat quite uncomfortably with me in watching this space almost from a sideline as it's really unraveled quite quickly. And I think this probably isn't something that I'm sitting with alone based around conversations I have with many of you all the time, is how it does conflict with our values and ethos. You know, we've worked so hard on relationship with food, appreciating that everyone can seek health no matter what their size, really framing nutrition as its ability to, achieve our definition of success and performance in our lives based around who they want to be, not just what they want to look like. And I've really dedicated the last 6 years to ensuring that we're monitoring success away from body composition and away from weight. So to see the discussion shift so heavily to success only being measured by weight loss and almost weight loss at all costs has been really hard. I think because we've all probably heard stories like or worked with clients that, are nauseous beyond normalcy. They can't be who they want to be with family, in work life. They're no longer able to exercise properly. They're low in energy. They're fatigued. They're undernourished, and they're underfueled. But they're losing weight. So what a success. And that I find that really hard because if there's anything we know about, long-term health, it's, keeping muscle mass on, being active, being present, belonging, socializing. Like, man, when we've actually missed the core health piece of food. And I think we do need to be vocal in this space to ensure that when we're working with a client, we're not just measuring success based on a number. We're being the voice and the ears to really check in with how they're going, how they're coping, what's their capacity, and hold at the center who they want to be and what success actually looks like as an identity goal, not just an outcome goal of weight. Because if they can't show up with presence, with playfulness, with energy, with focus, with concentration, with socialization as a person, then where does weight actually sit? And I think that, as a really long-winded concern of mine, definitely a tangent, I apologize, but that has sat so heavily with me. And I don't agree with it because I think we're at this crossroads where we can appreciate that we do have a clinical need for this drug, which has real positive potential. But at the other side of that, we're pulled in this other direction where it's prescribed and pursued with weight as the only goal. And it's out of context a lot of the time and not with the person at the center at heart. I hope that makes sense. But yeah, I just needed to cover that before I go on to the actual clinical bit. Because I don't know if we'll solve that, but it is something that sits quite heavily with me. And I do hope that we see a change in the culture around it and the discussion around it and where nutrition and dietetics can sit in a really important space in holding true to that. And when I go through this next section in, I guess, our role and all those things, I hope that it offers a sense more than how many grams of protein someone needs to aim for. Um, because that's the bit that I'm actually, it is really important. The clinical research bit is really important, but even more so in that is how we frame it and the behavioral side of what we do with a client working with GLP-1. So our role, and I can't stress this enough, when we're working with someone, and this is basically the whole concept of rapport building and trust building, it's really important that we don't hold a morality on someone's decision or actions. And I think as a profession, we're at risk of saying, we're pro this or anti this, and it places something in black and white when actually there's so much nuance to it that it should never actually be placed in there. And our role, if we are moved towards more of a client-centered approach, needs to be less around, I'm the dietitian, I will tell you what is best for you and prescribe it, to more a partnership where you work alongside someone on what is important to them, what they want to prioritize, and you help them, be alongside them to guide. And it really takes that hierarchical approach from healthcare, which definitely still exists, and places someone as an equal, as they are the expert in their life. And you can absolutely maintain your expertise in nutrition, science, behavioral therapy, all those types of things. So I think, if we're looking at what a what a support framework needs to look like with someone currently taking GLP-1s or considering it, it needs to, first of all, have the full baseline screening, and it needs to consider so much more than just a diet history or a clinical history. It needs to screen for risk. It needs to really get a baseline of things like lifestyle, capacity, relationship with food, any concerns that are going to be contraindications to its use, but also so important in how you're working with that client, not just in that short-term management of GLP-1s and its potential side effects, but also that long-term management of how we titrating off these. Um, in a clinical sense, I will not spend much time with that. I think we are all very good dietitians that are listening to this. Obviously, nutrient density is paramount. When you are on a very low energy intake, every bite literally counts to make sure that we're not at risk of deficiencies, both in macronutrients and micronutrients. We need to optimize protein to try and make the most of muscle protein synthesis when the risk of lean mass loss is increased. As a guide, 1.2 to 1.6 grams per kilogram of weight is a good guide as a protein source per day, or protein target per day, sorry. And for an active individual, that can then be increased. There needs to be a consideration of resistance training, and more so that has become a really key part. So, if you've got a client who is taking GLP-1s and it's at such a cost to their energy, the nausea is awful, and they're unable to exercise, I would absolutely flag that in the multidisciplinary team, that there needs to be a review of what that dosage looks like and what this looks like long term for the client in terms of health, well-being, and not just a weight loss target. The GI management is a really big one. Small frequent meals can be really helpful here. Lowering fat during titration is really important. Turns out I can't say titration today, so apologies. But also hydration and fiber, because of the slowed gastric emptying. There is a increased risk of things like constipation, so management of that. But also that long-term management needs to be the conversation from the start. It can't be something that's just an afterthought 6 months down the track of like, hey, when are we going to come off this? Or when will we come off this? Or what does success look like in terms of an endpoint? It needs to be from the start as a graduation pathway with the multidisciplinary team plus your client. And I now need to dig into some of the behavioral things that is additional to the clinical. Our role isn't to tell someone what to do, it is to actually shape their success long term. And sometimes that does look like helping someone make food decisions that work for them within their capacity, both in appetite, energy, environment, all these things, but also behaviorally in the emotional and mental sense. So I've had a bit of a think about this and the things I want to flag. And I'm coming from a space where I have worked with GLP-1s, but that is not my niche. But these are the things that are on my mind when I am working with someone taking GLP-1s or looking at these side effects that impact and that risk. So, first of all, we really want to make sure that we're replacing cues. So, not just ignoring them. So, your hunger cues are, unreliable right now. So, how are we going to then, work along a schedule to a bit of a structure and really empowering that client to place some, I guess, autonomy in their day, but also control in their day as well. Um, Also, eating will be way more mechanical. It's taking out, gosh, most other parts of food and eating. So the pleasure's gone, the emotional sense is gone, mental appetite's gone. So we can't, we've also lost the reward, which I think talking to a lot of clients and hearing stories, that is something that is really empowering for some, but horrible for others. And so we work actively against this, right? So the thing I mean here is if we're looking at, say, the RAVES framework, special mention, RAVES always, how are we making sure that eating socially stays in someone's daily, weekly schedule? How are we ensuring that spontaneity is still a piece that exists? Um, you know, Things like, are you still able to eat a meal with your family? Are you sitting at the table? Are you eating socially? Have you got that connection? Are you still able to eat at, have you still been eating at your favorite restaurant? All these types of things, we're actually trying to actively work against what GLP-1 is probably taking away to try and add some pleasure back in and reward around food that is more than just food itself. Because as a human race, we need to belong, we need to connect, and food is traditionally really central to that. We need to track the displaced behaviors as well. And this is alongside psychology a lot of the time. And absolutely hold your lane here and refer on as soon as you need. I would highly recommend a psychologist being involved in most settings around this. But if the displaced behavior, what I mean by that is if food has been a sense of comfort, numbing, all of those things for a client previously, where's that behavior now sitting? So where's it been displaced to? So what's filling that space that food used to fill for you? And being really aware of that and keeping that in the conversation. And also, I've already mentioned it, but and I also mention it quite a little bit, it's me on repeat, is holding that identity and self-concept at the absolute core of conversation and always using it as a bit of a magnet back to why we're actually here and who we're trying to be, not just what we're looking to achieve. And what that means is that, if at any point this is coming at the cost of who they want to be and actually the opposite of what they thought they were going to achieve through weight loss, then it just acts to bring them back to going, oh, let's challenge that. Let's consider a different option. What else can we consider here? So, the conversation also about cessation needs to be from day one. I really will stick to it. But also the way that we track progress in a client's life and in our clinic room needs to be so much more than how much weight have they lost this week. It needs to track function, purpose, mental health alongside risk and possible triggers. So hold your scope, but collaboration is going to be so key here with the endocrinologist, GP, psychologist to ensure that a client isn't in this alone and also has a really wholesome, really empowered approach to GLP-1s if it's a path that they have chosen to go down with their weight management or their chronic disease management. I think there is a place where we need to sit in the grey, appreciate the nuance, and show up for our clients with listening, appreciation, validation of why they're here, but also how we might be able to help. When I'm thinking about all of this and I'm thinking about my notes, so often we review nutrition in the sense of well-being, emotional well-being, mental well-being, physical well-being, financial well-being, environment well-being. All of these things like access and affordability, emotional side, mental side are impacted by GLP-1s. And so I think our place in making sure that we elevate these and listen to these in all aspects of going, we aren't just after an outcome measure, we're after a well person, is going to sit really nicely in how you approach, the next person that comes in your clinic room who may want to work alongside you with GLP-1s on board or is considering starting them, and working with them in a way that really takes away the morality of that decision and empowers them with a decision that feels right for them. Um, and I have absolutely done my time. So I'm going to open up for questions now. I did get some via Instagram, so I'll start with those. But yes, this is a Q&A. Please jump in with any questions if you like. But also you can yell out to us at any point in time. And I'm assuming we're going to do a part 2 at some point as well because there's so much I didn't cover. Okay, so the first one was, what are the considerations when working with a type 1 diabetic, not for weight loss? Okay, so with this one, I think the interesting piece with type 1 diabetes is that it is off label at the moment, which is super interesting. It is emerging. However, it has been utilized for different reasons, such as reducing total insulin dose, improving HbA1c, but also the glucagon suppression, which can help as well. So the considerations are absolutely unique to the individual that's in front of you. But the things that you want to be looking at is insulin doses will absolutely need to be active in its retitration because of the changes in need, amounts, dosages, and also gastric emptying is impacted as well. And because that slows, it may change the timing of that pre-meal bolus. I would say for that reason, a CGM is almost a non-negotiable if you're a type 1 diabetic if you're working with a type 1 diabetic and they're considering GLP-1s. Also, the food noise side of things would probably find interesting in this piece. Type 1 diabetics have a really rough time already, like food calculations and choices around food are always part of their day to survive. And so if we reduce that food noise and trust and prompting, are we risking an accidental underfueling, accidental hypos because of forgetting to eat or going a long time between meals? But also, is there mental disengagement as a result of GLP-1s? I think they're just all questions that I would probably pay attention to with a client. I don't actually have answers. There might be some great research with answers, and I apologize for not being on top of that. Body composition as well. They're already an increased risk group for sarcopenia and also low or suboptimal bone mineral density. So keeping that in mind, I think there is a long-term health risk just to be on top of with nutrients, possible deficiencies, and adequacy in intake. And alongside that, obviously making sure that if someone is active, there isn't that risk of, quite chronic low energy availability that leads to that cascade of symptoms known as REDS. The other piece to this touches on the increased risk of hypoglycemia because of the impact and the suppression of glycagon as a result of GLP-1s. There is, particularly in endurance athletes, an increased risk of hypoglycemia if they're an endurance athlete with type 1 diabetes taking GLP-1s. So you'd have to be very on top of fueling and the timing of that, considering the gastric emptying, is a big one as well. So that's just me blurting out some thoughts. And multidisciplinary team would be essential. But a good question, because I think that's one that will come up a lot in practice. And I've definitely got some type 1 diabetics taking GLP-1s for various reasons who are also athletes. So I think clinically is one that we definitely need to be on top of and really curious of. Any other questions? Amazing. In the interest of time, which I have already gone over, which is not surprising, but I am actually impressed it's not more, considering how much I wrote in my notes. I hope this session has been useful to you, and something that you can take with you into the clinic with your clients, and a little bit more practical. But I am not niche in this area. This is not my one space. So, if there's anything in here that was something to be queried or that I can learn from and get better from, please let me know. I am more than happy to continue to learn and really would love to hear your voice, your thoughts on this. I think it's a really interesting one in our space, and it's something that takes up a lot of our supervision calls, in particular in the group sessions. So it's definitely topical for most of us, I think. So thank you so much for your time, everyone, and looking forward to the next live Q&A. If you would like to become a Academy member, we've got a couple of different options. In the basic option, where you're part of the community, you're accessing research paper updates each week, and knowing what's on offer, all the way to a pro membership and supervision membership, all part of it, where we've got more than 35 modules now on all different topics that really dive deep. We get beautiful guests on, which are my absolute favorite, and we're really I'm just so proud of that, where it has a real behavioral lens, not just a clinical one, to how we practice and work with clients. So we'd love to offer a place, and you will get an email with a bit of an offer after this session. So thank you so much for being involved, guys. It has been an absolute pleasure. So thank you. Oh, thank you. It's so interesting, isn't it? I think it'll be really incredible watching how this emerges, considering how fast it has grown so quickly. So yeah, thank you so much, everyone. Chat soon.